Good evening, everyone. I take much pleasure in welcoming you all to Dialogues today. Today, Dialogues will officially launch Dr. Nishaant Choksi's recently published book, Graphic Politics in Eastern India, Script and the Quest for Autonomy. And following the book launch, we will have a panel discussion. We have Pranjali, Kulkarni and Dr. Rahi, Soren, who are our panelists for today. I would like to introduce Dr. Nishaant Choksi first and foremost. Dr. Choksi is Assistant Professor in the Humanities and Social Sciences Department at IIT Gandhinagar. He completed his PhD in Linguistic Anthropology from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. His research areas primarily include the study of script and writing systems, language and performance, the aesthetic component of language, and the cultural politics of heritage. He primarily examines these themes with respect to the situation of the Adivasi communities in India, with whom he has been conducting ethnographic research for over 2 decades now. And his ongoing field projects include work with the Bhili speakers in Eastern Gujarat, the Mundari speakers in Jharkhand, and the Santali speakers in West Bengal. Welcome, Dr. Choksi, and I would now request Dr. Jason Manjali, Head of the Department at Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Gandhinagar, to do the honors and officially launch Dr. Choksi's book. Thank you.
Thank you, Maithili. I have the book here. I think let me just change the background so that remove the filter part of it. So here is the book. So I asked Nishaant to give me a copy for the time being. So he was kind enough to lend me a copy. So this is a very interestingly designed cover. So I was trying to get a sense of the content of the book. So I tried to skim through the introduction a little bit, and I found that something that some of it has been, I've been thinking about, how a language as a tool, people use for, dominating and creating hegemonies, in different cultural spaces. Some of it is that my awareness of it is like going back to my own state, where certain dialects, certain kinds of linguistic expression is, termed or I would labeled as market space, market language, which not, because, it actually belongs to a certain communities, and, and that expression is demeaned by the community. So I think, study of those kind of framework, looking at the implications, looking at the cultural expressions of those languages, I think probably something that Nishaant tried to do in the book, and I think more of such works would be very relevant to the current political, cultural discourse that we are, going through. Nishaant, congratulations, and I am truly proud of the work that you have done, and the entire department and the institute is truly proud, and I think we will have more such work coming out of your scholarship and ethnographic research. Thank you so much, and I would like to officially launch The Graphic Politics in Eastern India, Script and the Quest for Autonomy by Nishaant Choksi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jason. Many congratulations, Dr. Nishaant Choksi. And may I request you to please tell us about your work and introduce the book to us now.
Okay, thank you, Maithili. Yeah, and thanks, of course, to Jason and the HSS faculty, for, this book is, I could do this book because of this, I was given the space here and the time and, a great environment to do it. So thank you very much. And thanks to the panelists, Pranjali, who since I joined was, has been an interlocutor with me about issues related to language. So, and Rahi, professor at Jadavpur, who I've known since I was doing fieldwork actually for this book. She was actually doing fieldwork in the same area. And so, so my association with her goes a long way as well. So thank you very much. And thanks to the Dialogues team for hosting. So yeah, I will just give you a brief, I just created a little presentation here just to show you a little bit about the book and its arguments. I can, yeah, so maybe I'll just try to take 20 minutes or so and just introduce you a little bit about the book and its arguments, and then, the panelists, I'll give the floor over to the panelists and then we can have a discussion. So thank you. And thank you all for coming, colleagues, friends, family. So the introduction to the study. So the book is based on 18 months of field work in various places in Eastern India. So mostly I worked in the area of Chilimili. That was my site. It's a village on the border of Bankura, Midnapur, and or now called Jharkhand, Bankura, Jharkhand, and Purulia districts, and near the borders with Jharkhand and Orissa states, or sorry, Odisha states. Those are old Odisha states. So it focuses on the politics, ideologies, and creation and deployment of script, right, in the Santal Adivasi communities, which is the largest Adivasi group in Eastern India, and they speak an Austroasiatic language called Santali. And the book essentially argues for the importance of graphic politics for understanding the movements of autonomy. So in the introduction, I try to contextualize this idea of graphic politics, in the greater South Asian context, with different major languages, just, I discussed the Hindi-Urdu divide, which is one of, I think, script more than it is actually language, and other situations. And then I talk about it also as in various indigenous communities worldwide. Look at this. So what do I mean by graphic politics? Just to some clarification. So in the study of South Asia and in other parts of the world, discussions about script have often been conflated with discussion about language. So usually when we talk about language, the history of language or study language, script is kind of a subordinate part of that, right? So we usually look at language as a script as a secondary aspect of the larger, context of language. But Santali, as well as many other languages, not just Santali, but many other languages, including dominant ones, have been written in multiple scripts, right? So this idea of multiscriptality is a very important feature. And so then I argue that we must look at the politics of script and the study of script as separate from language, right? That doesn't mean I don't talk about language in the book. I mean, the book is a lot about language, but I try to analytically separate the two to see what new insights that can give us. And I argue that in the written form, and its very materiality, right? It's that it's a material manifestation, durable and can circulate, right? Is subject to different ideological processes and circulates along different pathways than an oral language, which is why script is such an important feature of politics, right? In multi-scriptal milieu, such as Eastern India, where I did this field work. So I can just show you here the scripts of Santali language. So the major scripts I was working with include the Roman script. So Santali has a missionary, was given a Roman script by the missionaries that has its own diacritics that's still in use in various places, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Assam, Bangladesh. So, and of course the Roman script is also majorly associated with the other language, English. Then the Eastern Brahmi script, which is in use primarily for Santali, which is used in West Bengal mostly. The Devanagari script, which is used in Jharkhand mostly. And then the Ol Chiki script, which is used mostly in Odisha, West Bengal, and Jharkhand. So these are the scripts I was working with. And Santali language is written in all of these scripts. So the other concept I was looking at is autonomy. So this work envisions autonomy as I looked at a famous political theorist and historian, Ranabir Samadar. He said that autonomy is a new space of politics that moves beyond governmental rationalities or relations of freedom and domination to speak of rights and justice. So autonomy, sometimes it seems like it reproduces the structures from which it wants to be autonomous. So for instance, script could be one of those things, in fact. But in every reproduction, there's also a difference, right? There is a kind of separation, and that's what I'm interested in when I'm looking at this. So this is a study argues for the Santals of Eastern India that graphic politics is interested in autonomy. And why do I look at autonomy? Because autonomy has been a central feature of these Adivasi movements for a long time. And in Eastern India, in fact, in all of India, except for the Northeast, but in the central Indian Adivasi belt, the Jharkhand is the oldest movement for Adivasi autonomy in South Asia. And so Jharkhand state was created in 2000, but several parts of the country that had witnessed demands and agitations for Jharkhand that have been part of this historical movement since the 1930s actually were left out of Jharkhand state, right? And this includes the area where I was working, Purulia, Bankura, West Midnapur, Jhargram districts. These were actively witnessed Jharkhand agitations, but were left out. So the development and presence of Santali language, and in the later phase, the propagation of this Ol Chiki script, alongside the other scripts, perpetuates the spaces of Adivasi autonomy that were premised in this movement for Jharkhand, even though they'll never be part of Jharkhand state. In fact, the state movement has kind of come to a culmination, but this autonomy that underlied this movement is still there. And so the demand for Jharkhand is not a demand necessarily for a state, but it's a demand for autonomy. And that demand goes back a long way and it's still present. And that's why script becomes such a big factor, as my argument is shaped by graphic politics. So I'll quickly go through the chapters and we very, very briefly. So this idea of Ol, right? Ol in Santali means writing. And for instance, Ol Chiki means writing symbol. And the Santals have a much older idea of writing, Ol, that predates this adoption of alphabetic script, right? So script is tied to this idea of oral language. So that doesn't necessarily, writing doesn't have to be tied to that. So for instance, you see here, this is the Kond Ol, right? Which has these genealogies, all as a way of mediating between humans and spirits, bongas, diagrams. These are all called writing in the Santali language, or all. But they're not, they're another idea of literacy that's not tied to oral language. So what happened is when the missionaries came in and gave the Roman script, and then later on, when schools were started, this alphabetic literacy, right, this special kind of literacy that we associate with literacy, alphabetic literacy, was introduced. And then as the movement of autonomy continued, Santals attempted to blend these ideas, older ideas of Ol, diagramming, and Ol as mediating between spirits and humans, with alphabetic literacy. And then you got various kinds of scripts. I found so many different kinds of scripts actually that were made. And the most popular ones, for instance, Sadhu Ramchand Murmu from West Bengal, Silda Jharkhand, he made a script called the Mojdandar Ak, Drawings of the Bliss Cave, which is still fairly popular, although it never got printed, so it limited circulation. But he believed that these scripts were inspired by the bongas, and the book he wrote was called Ishrad, or the voice of the bongas in this script, the spirits. So, and then of course the Ol Chiki script, which was also said to be inspired by spirits, by Raghunath Murmu from Dahardi, which is in Mayurbhanj district, Orissa. So this is the most popular script, Ol Chiki script, right? And each of these letters have different meanings. For instance, this Aw is law, which means fire, Ot, which means earth, right? If you look at ear, it means to plow. So the letters have meaning, the pictures have meaning. You see Ol at the end there, the P-like character. That's a hand with a pen. That means writing. So chapter 3 is a study of various scripts and codes used in the markets of Jilimili, this very small bazaar, small village which has a bazaar in southwest West Bengal, and argues that different script codes, combinations signify contestations over territory. So the use of different, mostly, you find Eastern Brahmi script, but then you find Ol Chiki script, then you find Ol Chiki Roman combinations, right? So you have different ideas of territory administration. For instance, in this picture here, we have the same word, Marangtung, Bir Pargana, Maji, Madwa, written in Ol Chiki, Roman, Eastern Brahmi, and everything is written in 3 scripts, even though the language is the same. And this is the Santal administration, which is different from the governmental administration, which is only written in Eastern Brahmi and Bengali. So there's different contestations over territory that are visually, inscribed on the landscape through different scripts, right? And Ol Chiki Roman combination gives sort of a trans-regional flavor that is, this is projecting a trans-regional Santal identity, whereas the Eastern Brahmi, the local flavor, like placing it in West Bengal in this area, even though the language is Santali, the Eastern Brahmi Santali. Okay. So chapter 4 is about education and caste community. So Santali still by older people in the area, caste Hindu, Bengali speakers, was not considered a real language, but as what they call tar in the local variety of Bangla, Jharkhandi Bangla, which is just like grunt sounds or something. It wasn't considered like a real language, but tar. They would say, oh yeah, tare bolo, like they speak in tar. So this was part of a caste logic that subordinated, the Adivasi communities, right, and subordinated their cultural practices and their language in a hierarchically lower way through discourse, right? And so there was clear caste hierarchy in the way things were understood as language and not language. But part of the way that Santal struggled to reconfigure this was to try to change their perception of a hierarchical caste, a hierarchically subordinate caste, right, to a linguistic community, which is equal. And part of this is you need educational recognition, the recognition of school as literacy. So there was a struggle for education, and there was a big struggle in the school for that. And it wasn't easily accepted, even though the West Bengal government mandated it even as early as in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't even implemented until in the 2000s after a lot of struggle. And, this struggle of school became a part. So Santali was instituted when I was there from class 9, and now you have a medium actually. But as you can see, the students were really trying to place these Ol Chiki and Santali language. They would inscribe it all over the school, even though in the school, mostly everything was written officially in Bengali. So the school became a site of politics, even for children 8 or 9. So then the chapter 5 is, I looked at print media, right? So this region has a lot of magazines, newspapers, and various kinds of print media. And this media ranges from Santali in Santali language, in Eastern Brahmi script, Ol Chiki script, Roman script, quite a lot of print media. And a lot of it is also bilingual and multiscriptal. For instance, the newspapers, you can see the top is written in Ol Chiki and Eastern Brahmi, and inside you have Bengali articles, Santali and Eastern Brahmi articles, Santali and Ol Chiki. So this speaks to the various audiences that are there. You have magazines now that are bilingual. So that various communities, different Adivasi communities, even who don't speak Santali or know Ol Chiki script or anything, can still participate in the different kind of movements in which that script and that the language represents by putting Bengali and Santali together, right? And not subordinating Santali to Bengali. So this is what I call Jharkhand imagination, right? So it attempts to move beyond this idea of vernacular, right? Of Santali as a vernacular language, right? It's not a vernacular. It's in this imagination, in this part of Eastern Bengal, it's put in conversation with Bengali, right? And this also shows that there's an enthusiasm of different generations of Santali language activists for creating the magazines and newspapers over different generations. And part of it is the older generation doesn't use Ol Chiki as much. They use the Eastern Brahmi, and the newer generation is very much a fan of Ol Chiki script. So in the script movement has sort of allowed a renewed interest, right, in the magazine and print production. And then there's a new online space, which is also multiscriptal, and in multiscriptal in a much less regulated way than the print media space. But this online space is often linked with media, print media. So magazine editors often host the forums or they mediate between this online spaces. And you can see the graphic politics operating in the online space in a different way. So just some final thoughts, and then I can just open up to the panel. So the arguments in this book are focused on Adivasis in Eastern India, but they're applicable to other movements across the world. I've noticed very many in Southeast Asia, in Native American contexts. Script is a big part of the way in which these indigenous communities are struggling to carve out spaces of autonomy within the dominant societies. And of course, it interacts with the histories of those places, the linguistic histories, graphic histories of the place where they're in, and in order to assert specific types of autonomy. But this relation between graphic autonomy and graphic politics and autonomy within indigenous politics is something that I've seen quite a bit, or I've read about. And also this focus on script as separate but intertwined with language, I think gives us a new perspective. So usually we start with language when we want to look at anything related to, language politics or linguistics or anything like this. Usually we start with this idea of language, and we start with this idea of speech. What is the speech or the content? But what if we focus on script? So this book is a study of that. And I think increasingly there are more and more studies recently, of which this book is in conversation with, maybe in the last 10 years or so, where you start from script and you see what different kinds of ideas and different ways of understanding language ideologies and the politics of language, history, when we start from script, right? Start from the materiality first. And then it also gives us new perspectives, as this book has tried to show, in fields such as education, literature in different languages. So Santali literature also needs a study of multiscriptal communities. Script and literature is also something that is, it talks about, and then media studies. So yeah, oops, sorry. Yeah, so, okay, I have to go back. So yeah, thank you everybody for the, that's all I have to say, just as an introduction. I know it was very quick introduction of, a whole monograph, so I didn't really do justice to it that much, but I hope you got an idea of the basic, the basic points and structure of the book. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Choksi, for giving us that glimpse into your book. I'm sure we're going to get some more questions from the panel. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. We have with us Pranjali Kulkarni and Dr. Rahi Soren. Pranjali is a senior PhD student at the Center for Cognitive and Brain Sciences at IIT Gandhinagar. She works on language processing in the brain, specifically dealing with semantics and the context-based use of language. Dr. Rahi Soren is assistant professor at the School of Oceanographic Studies at Jadavpur University. And alongside her scientific work, she also engages with Santal culture and actively participates in the documentation and the preservation of the endangered cultural heritage. Her works include mapping the traditional Santali songs, as well as locating and digitizing the early Santali periodicals through digital humanities and archiving at the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Jadavpur University. So Pranjali and Dr. Soren, over to you. I think we can begin with the panel discussion.
Hi. So, I don't mind if Dr. Soren wants to go first, and anyway, that's fine.
No, of course not. Pranjali, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody, and congratulations to Nishaant. I actually had a chance to go through the book, and it's beautifully written. I actually really admire the way, the ease at which it's written. In terms of academic books, it's usually hard to access, but it's really well written. Also, in terms of the scholarship that I have come across on language in cognitive science, this was a very different and very challenging perspective to the kind of idea of language that we carry in linguistics or the study of language in cognitive science. And it was very enlightening for me in terms of understanding how the context or the way language develops or the role of it in the society can structurally change what it is or what it means and how we should view it in terms of the academic study itself. So usually it's always viewed as in a very structural form in terms of linguistic study, and the abstraction of it kind of takes away the content and the gist of how it has been developed and the nuances that come from the actual development of the language. And especially the idea of multiscriptality, which has to be understood apart from the study of language itself or how it interacts with language, is again a very fresh perspective and was very interesting to read throughout the work, especially like your second chapter and the fourth chapter really fascinated me in terms of challenging the priority of putting the linguistic elements, usually understanding the speech or how it is talked, and all of that comes in priority. And script is always seen as a structural aspect that's overlaid, but not something as an intrinsic part of the language itself. It always comes in the end. So in that way, it was really beautiful. Am I audible?
Yes, Pranjali.
Yes, you are.
Yes, because everybody was frozen, so I was just confused. Okay. So I have multiple questions regarding multiple things. So first of all, coming from a very linguistic perspective, I was interested in knowing, on how the development of script itself, kind of changed or with the spread and, peculiar uses and implications of the political movement attached to it. So when Ol Chiki was introduced and how, because it did not come from a formal education platform. It started from print media and it started from, it's used in society and, popular media. And how I wanted to ask if you sat down and how you saw the change in the script itself, and did it matter and did it change some patterns of usage in the language as well? So how that kind of transformation, if any, happened over there. Also, in terms of methodology, I was very curious because it heavily draws from like a very anthropological perspective, right? The entirety of your work. So what were the challenges to kind of merge a linguistic study of a script or multiple scripts that are going on, and what were the main challenges that you found while tying it up to the development of the script with the political journey of the script? And again, I was also curious about if you are still in touch with your field assistants and if you have seen how the use of script now introduced in schools after, because it has been quite a few years, if there has been any change in terms of how the script is taken by students, and if it has changed any patterns in terms of market use of it or common usage of it, because now it is introduced in schools as well. Tying to that, I had another question about how the state has taken this idea of, having Santali, Ol Chiki script introduced along with Santali in schools, and are they kind of adopting it as an alternative, as a local language that has been taught along with the other languages. So that was one of the other questions. I still have a lot more questions, but sticking to this part of it, I would ask you, how did you see the script itself kind of change the use, or if at all it affected throughout its development, the use of it in the society, or the movements of this autonomy that you said it acted as a medium in. So yeah, these were like few of the main areas I was really fascinated by and wanted to ask you about. I can kind of, Dr. Soren can continue and so on, and I can actually pitch in later on when Nishaant responds.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, let me congratulate again my dear friend, Professor Nishaant Choksi. And to do justice to this book, first of all, it's an amazing effort, of course. And the different kinds of subjects that it discusses is very unique in its own way. I found it very interesting, and I would like to, borrow things from the book and perhaps state it here for a bit, so to do just some justice to his efforts. So it's of course a very indeed important piece of work which addresses graphic politics in Indian context, as it's very unique where indigenous Indian language Santali is concerned, and this kind of academic discourse has not been attempted so far as in a global language such as English. To look at the book itself, it's published by Bloomsbury and is part of the series many of us might know, Bloomsbury Studies in Linguistic Anthropology. This investigates social life through everyday discursive practices, making these practices visible, and it's very important for a community, especially which conceives itself to be marginalized. The series also focuses on specific themes to advance the fields of language contacts, its dynamics, language revitalization, which I find very important when talking about the orality and how it has transformed from say mostly majorly oral to a written form, and how the dynamics has changed from using of multiple scripts and how scripts have been introduced. And as Nishaant said, the concept of all is very different from how script is perceived to the rest of the world. So to delve into the same, Nishaant's book not only look at the politics of language, what I found, and script, but also enlightens about the sensitive tightrope which the Santals work every day to assert and strive for the recognition of identity. This book suggests that scripts complicates the division between the symbolic and the material, and argues for the centrality of the graphic dimension of language to the contemporary politics among Santali-speaking Adivasis in today's West Bengal. Also, Nishaant says that he had divided it in different chapters, and each of it is very interesting, and it's impossible to concise it in such a small time frame. I would encourage everyone to read it for themselves to do justice to this. Well, the semiotic approach and ethnographically, which elucidates the linkage between development and propagation of script, the ongoing struggles over territory and resources, and the evolution of the politics of autonomy in the wake of the Jharkhand state. One of the main premises of the book again was the movement for autonomy that characterized the Jharkhand movement, one in which territory and community were reimagined against the backdrop of historical oppression by quote unquote the others, or how the Santals put them as the Tikus. This book also argues through a politics of script, even if the Adivasis of West Bengal failed to join the separate Jharkhand state, among both scholars and those who find themselves in the situation where state-centric politics have proved unsuccessful, graphic politics reveals how autonomy may persist among state-centric or identity-based demands. The book, therefore, seeks a new path, one in which hitherto or rarely discussed in studies of language politics in South Asia, and even less with respect to Adivasi, become a central vector for autonomy in the new political era. Further, we see how the bazaar or the marketplace and sphere of political assertion in daily life among the marginalized Santali speaking Adivasi community through manipulations of different scripts. This book has truly demonstrated the role of graphic politics that plays in autonomous design intervention in one small colony of Eastern India. But of course, this is not limited to it. And as Nishaant puts it, it is a framework which can be replicated or can be looked upon in the other parts of the world as well, where these frameworks are the critical means for transmission of political ideas, such as the autonomy across boundaries of time and space, ethnicity and caste, and even the linguistic code itself. Language thus becomes more than speech or reference and more than a denotational emblem for a particular ethnic group, region, or grammatical code. As Professor Anthony Webster of the University of Texas, I borrowed it from here, and I quote, says about the book, it's an important contribution to ethnographically informed discussions of graphic pluralism. Here, Choksi expertly delves into the complex issues concerning the politics of script, revealing the ways that multiple scripts are implicated in concerns about languages, territory, community, sense of history, and ultimately autonomy. He also finds it to be a very insightful book. Well, I couldn't agree more to this. And I feel the book paves a path towards understanding the lacunae in our commonsensical understanding of the relation between language and politics and steers us towards the possibilities for unmaking and, of course, remaking our world towards plurality. So the book is essentially and very important additional to academia and scholars of not only linguistics and anthropology, but as well as language and politics, who derive, immense ideas to ponder upon and carry forward the research in a global context. So here I have just two questions that I put forward, and I think these are like a pretty large ones in themselves. So I would like to know more about the acceptance or the lack of it of the multiscriptality among the Santali speakers in Bengal, Jharkhand, Odisha, and Nepal, Bangladesh as well, if possible. And I would also like you to throw some light on how would you like to further this engagement, and perhaps a note to the upcoming scholars who are interested in this field as a subject and a very interdisciplinary one for that matter. Thank you. Over to you, Nishaant.
Thank you very much, Rahi and Pranjali, for your nice words, insightful comments, and questions. Yeah, I noted down the questions, and I can maybe just start with Pranjali's points, and then I can move to Rahi's points. So Pranjali asked about the development of the script or scripts over time, and how this political movement has changed these ideas. And I think this also relates to Rahi's first question about the acceptance of multiscriptality. So yeah, I mean, in older generations, I think, as far as I know, like there was a real emphasis on this idea of Santali language in whatever script was possible. And I think that created this idea of multiscriptality. And so there was this, and people wouldn't learn it in school. You know, you wouldn't learn how to write. You would learn how to write Bengali and Eastern Brahmi in school, or Roman and English in school, but you would never learn how to write Santali in Eastern Brahmi script in school, right? So that was all developed by modifying, and there was a lot of different kind of conventions that were developed outside of school and through a whole print sphere, which was different, and then how printing, the printing presses at that time, you know, how they could, you know, people had to travel long distances to get things printed in Eastern Brahmi script, because there was only Bengali printing presses. And then over time, this changed to the Ol Chiki couldn't be printed that much. There was one printing press in West Bengal and one printing press in Jharkhand and Odisha. There was like 3 printing presses. It was very difficult. But now this computer age has changed everything. So, you know, standardizing, or, you know, convention, easy editing, anything you can just type in Ol Chiki. There's fonts now, and then you can just give it to like an offset printer and they can print it. So this has really changed the script. And now when we see in the new age, the social media age, it's like you're seeing all different kinds of combinations of script, right? So in that sense, I think for this acceptance of multiscriptality, so there is an acceptance of that multiscriptality is almost inevitable because, you know, Santali is a marginalized community. It doesn't have its own state. It's not like an official language. So everyone's going to have to learn in Bengali and other languages. But for writing Santali, I mean, there is a trend that, you know, people think, and for a long time, like people think it should only be written in Ol Chiki among certain groups, especially in Jharkhand and Orissa and West Bengal, the Southwest West Bengal. You should write only in one script, right? Ol Chiki script should only be the standard. And I think that's come out quite a lot. But people who say that, I think, still write in different scripts. So, you know, and then there's one group that says only Roman should be the script, right? But people also, they write in different scripts. So I think there's a tendency, people say, yeah, and people have strong beliefs on the subject and everything. But I think also the situation is such that people are, you know, and these magazine editors are routinely transcribing from different scripts. If their magazine is in Ol Chiki, they'll accept something written in the Eastern Brahmi Bengali or in other scripts, and then they'll transcribe it. They'll do all of this. So yeah, I think that goes to the development and the acceptance part of it. Then the methodology, yeah, there are, you know, some challenges in bringing this interdisciplinary approach together of languages and scripts, and, you know, ethnography, and it requires some different methodologies. Luckily enough, I mean, I was exposed to this early on because my program itself was about this. I mean, my training was in this linguistic anthropology, trying to blend these together. But, you know, this idea that we have to, you know, we can't just base our research on only interviews or participant observation, like in ethnography that people do in sociology and anthropological research. We can't just do that. We have to start from the forms. You know, we have to look at we have to start with the linguistic forms. We need to know the language. We need to know the scripts. We need to be able to notice things like signs and texts and you know, what people are saying, eliciting things. So it's kind of a starting point, but you do that in the place. That's the difference, right? You have to go to the place where there's a whole environment to do that. And you don't just sit and focus on one aspect of the language. You focus on language, but you do that in a participant observation mode. And I think it's sort of a different mentality to look at language and actively be a participant observer in a place for a long time than to just go to a place and take some, linguistic forms and say this is fine, or go to a place and just do interviews. So, yeah. So am I in touch? Yeah, I'm in touch and I visit frequently. I just went right before lockdown again, right before the last year. So I see, and there is, as I said, there is changing uses of script, right? It's changing all the time, and it's changing with new technologies. Now, as Rahi knows very well, there's Santali medium schools, there's Santali programs in various universities. I think, I think Rahi is working on starting one in Jadavpur also. So, so it's a big difference than when I was working. When I was working there was nothing. I mean, it was just first instituted in high school. So now it's a big difference. There's big changes that have come out of this movement where people do MA in Santali. People, in the various universities of West Bengal, there's Santali programs, there's syllabuses, set syllabuses, net, everything. So, and this is going to have some effects. You're going to see standardizing effects over time, right? Where script, right now, the syllabus, everything is taught in multi-script is part of it because there's not enough. But I think there is a standardizing tendency is going to be there. But at the same time, because they don't have a state in everything, and also because of online text messaging, etc., you're seeing a non-standardizing. So you're seeing multiple scripts come. So you're having these two tendencies now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. State, yeah, so the state engages in various ways. I mean, the state has always, they have some magazine, they gave recognition. And so, but, the implementation of Santali language in state spheres is still very limited, right? I mean, it's very limited because there's not enough representation of Santali speakers. And there's just a resistance. People don't think they should even know Santali, even if they're in Santali speaking areas, not like teachers or people who work in banks, government offices. People don't think they should know. And if Santali speakers are multilingual in Bangla, then fine, we'll just go with Bangla then. So there's the state may have policies, but there is still, that doesn't erase the fact that there is a caste system, there's discrimination at all levels of implementation of anything regarding the state. So the state policy and then implementation of a system in which people are not represented and people are not, and that remain somewhat hostile to the aspirations of Adivasi communities. So it doesn't change the status quo in many ways then. So, and then how would I like to further this engagement? I mean, I think, yeah, there's several ways. I mean, now that there's so many departments of Santali, it'd be interesting to sort of engage with them and talk about, right now the focus is on literature, I think, because that's the template that was set up, like Santali department, like the Bangla department, like the English department, these are just focusing on literature. And I think there's really not a focus on different kind of investigations of looking at script, looking at transcription, looking at, and I think the work that, say, Rahi is doing on digitizing the different Santali magazines, the missionary archives have been digitized. Some of us have worked to do that. This will help have Santali speaking scholars or scholars who know Santali to kind of go in and do good historical work and maybe, this kind of anthropological work, and, people who are within those communities, I'm sure, can get much deeper insight than I was able to get if they can, if they get a proper sort of training and proper, if they get the resources to do that. So I think that's just one way I think we can open it up to others. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much. I think we can open it up to the floor now.
Yeah. Before that, I had something to respond to as well a bit. Yeah. So please tell us about. Do you think that the concept of one language, one script policy is also something that shifts us away from multilingualism or multiscriptality in practice, even if we do it in everyday life? Another observation that I had was, the concept of dignity and the importance of it, and the acceptance of the people in the marketplaces, or even in educational institutes are very limited. So I don't think that's going to change very soon, though. It's sad, but that's true as of now. So that is what I think. More discussions are essential, where people accept the language and try to understand it, even if they don't have much say, um, you know say a lot of benefit out of knowing the language, so to say. So yeah, Nishant.
Yeah, so I think, this one language, one script, idea that is also kind of very popular in the Ol Chiki movement, right? It's that, one mid Parsi, mid rod kind of.
Mid Parsi, yeah.
Yeah, rod mid Parsi.
Just add on and jump on to the question. Is it tied to the idea of having the standardized language in the sense, because there is an idea of standardization of language linked to the idea of autonomy of that language itself, and here now also tied to the identity of the Santali speakers. So as you're answering it, I just wanted to know that is that a very important, does it play an important role in establishing Ol Chiki script for Santali?
Thank you. I think, that's an important point. And actually, I think that point relates to the point of dignity in a sense, because if you have if you have a standard language, if you have a standard script and a standard language that is distinct from, because I remember when I was first working when I was first going to, Jilly-Milly to work. And before that, I met some people in Kolkata. These were some, Bengali speaking people who ran some offices and things. They're like, what are you going on? I'm saying, yeah, I want to look at the scripts and writing in Santali. I said, like, writing in Santali and stuff. And then those people said, who actually have worked there. They were in like the folklore and everything, and they worked there. And they would say, Santali doesn't even have a script. What are you even doing this? I mean, they'll just, use Bengali script and everything. Or people in Kolkata also would say that Santali is a dialect of Bengali, like some, it's like a weird kind of things. But many people said that actually. But then people started saying Ol Chiki, Ol Chiki, Ol Chiki, even in Kolkata, people will say Ol Chiki, Ol Chiki. Ol Chiki like has changed everything in a sense.
No, people still say Ol Chiki language.
Yeah, so, people say Ol Chiki language.
Yeah. So that's.
The people don't even recognize like Ol Chiki as a script. They just say Ol Chiki language because they have like no clue.
Because it developed as a different identity from Santali, right? Like it became a different movement too.
Yeah. They say, oh yeah, Santali. Everyone knows Santal Adivasi. I mean, everyone knows, but they say, oh yeah. Ol Chiki now. And before they spoke a dialect of Bangla. Now they speak Ol Chiki. I mean, people, the awareness is very limited, but this Ol Chiki script, what it did was it created a separate identity. It created an identity, at least, for Santali language as something apart from the dominant caste, the dominant language community in a sense. And that, even though people don't understand that it's a script, not a language, but it created, so in that sense, that standardization movement, I think, helped in some way create, I mean, it's still like so long to go, I think, you know, as is, but it helped in some way with creating that dignity, but I mean, creating that independent identity that can lead to the recognition in some way. And I think that was part of the work along the struggle to get it instituted in schools, right? As a different language. Even in schools, the teachers would say, oh yeah, like clearly, I mean, in the curriculum, it was said Santali language, but in schools, the teachers would say, the headmaster would say, we teach Ol Chiki here. I mean, they don't, but, you know, but how will it affect multiscriptality? I think in some sense, in the standardized realms, I think it will affect multiscriptality. So soon, probably over time, we're going to get the college syllabuses and everything sort of move probably closer to Ol Chiki, if they can, you know, if they can transcribe those things. I don't know, but that would have to be a huge transcription process that maybe people don't have the resources to do. So maybe you'll see still Eastern Brahmi, Roman, and Ol Chiki, with Ol Chiki is, well, right now, Ol Chiki is privileged for exams in West Bengal. Like if you write in Ol Chiki, the question papers are in Ol Chiki and things. But in terms of practice, I don't know, because, you know, they're always going to have to deal with Bengali script, and people who study in Bengali who have to write might find it easier to write or print things or things like this, type things in Bengali, unless there's a lot of fluency in Ol Chiki in that way. So, you know, I don't know, it will certainly affect multiscriptality, but I don't know if it will erase it. I don't, maybe not. I don't, yeah.
It probably takes generations to establish even that association with the script and language, when the language itself has been developed in other scripts in terms of popularization and use and all of that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, this is a very common thing. Like, for instance, Bengali script,
yeah,
which is, it's very hard to name it. I mean, I kind of named it Eastern Brahmi. I mean, that's like sort of a parent script.
it had multiple names. Yeah, that was one of the very technical questions I had, but it's okay.
Nagari,
very different
confusing with
from the Brahmic school. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Assamese Bangla script, and Bangla in Bengal, they just call it Bengali script. So that's another thing.
Yeah. In fact, it also is interesting to see where you know, there are other languages which lack scripts, and now they have this huge effort to build scripts and initiate writing on popularizing it in you know, even in South India there are many such instances. In Jharkhand itself there are such instances, and you know, the question of script and how, of the acceptability and the popular, what path will it follow is it's a very interesting question. And well, I keep thinking about it with no answer so far, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you know, the Ol Chiki script has become much more popular than the other scripts in Jharkhand. Like, you know, even this, you know, the Ho have a script. It's also very popular, but it's not so much Vangshti, but not so much writing is done in it. The Kuruk Orang have a script. The Mundari speakers in Odisha, they developed a script. So there's a lot of scripts, but the popularity kind of depends on a lot of circumstances, I think. And technology may be one. like, in Ol Chiki, Raghunath Murmu developed these printing blocks early on, right? He had the resources and he had the sort of idea to develop it. And then he could print things and make it, circulate it in a wide level. And then there was a lot of migration between Bengal and Jamshedpur, Tatanagar at the time, so that they could spread it quickly.
Yeah, and Raghunathpur as well.
Yeah. Raghunathpur. Yeah. So things were spread in that time quickly. So I mean, technology is something that is one way, but not just that. There's many ways. I mean, also they had to make, they had to make songs about it. They had to make dramas about it. They have to do so many things for people to accept it, right? They have to talk about it in terms of the bongas, the spirits. You have to make it culturally acceptable in so many ways. So it's not it's not just because a writing system is just a writing system that people are going to accept it.
Yeah, and I see this trend of learning Ol Chiki and giving all the effort, even people of 70 who are starting to learn how to write Ol Chiki in a very, giving a lot of effort, people who are retired, sitting at their home and trying to learn the script as they are trying to, as they think it to be their assertion of an identity through a script.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even people who don't know how to read and write, I think when they see Ol Chiki now, they have a certain association with it and a certain thing, because Ol Chiki is actually popularized. Even when I went and worked in the villages, Ol Chiki was more, you wouldn't see written texts as much, but you would songs, right? You would see songs, you would see association of Ol Chiki with spirits, you would see like dramas about Ol Chiki. So people associate Ol Chiki with a lot of different aspects of cultural identity and practice beyond reading and writing.
Also very symbolic and graphic in nature, right? So which is a very different thing than any other scripts that Santali would be associated with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of capturing particular gestures and traditions that is a very peculiarity that might have with the script, because it came from the symbols.
Right. Yeah. It was linked to some like sort of cultural history in that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pranjali. Thank you, Dr. Soren. I think we can open up the Q&A session. If any one of the audience members has a question, please unmute yourself and the floor is open.
So can I ask a question there, if nobody else has? Thank you, Nishaant, for that wonderful talk, and Pranjali and Dr. Soren as well. Sorry, pardon me, I have not read the book yet, so my question will have to be, there'll be an attempt to make you speak about the book. So my one question that I had is, when we talk about multiscriptality, we also think about how the script itself has been standardized, right? For instance, Assamese, Bangla, etc., the standardization that they underwent, and the pre-modern period was always about multiple ways of writing a certain language, and then we come down to a certain. So then in the study of Ol Chiki, does your book also talk about how Ol Chiki itself came down to a standardized form, or is it something that you deal with in the book?
So how the process of standardization
of Ol Chiki, because
So Ol Chiki, has a kind of, in some sense, a clear trajectory, like whereas, in like say Assamese, Bengali or whatever, you had these trajectories from pre-colonial, even like maybe non-modern times through modernity and everything, right? So you had a place where multiscriptality was kind of the norm, and then there was efforts to standardize it like around the colonial period, whereas Ol Chiki came up at the end of the colonial period on a standardized model in a sense, right? So different, like there was a attempt to, like when Raghunath Murmu wrote, sort of started, quote unquote, invented, although some say he discovered Ol Chiki. He wrote a grammar called Ronod with it. He wrote a number of books with it that already were trying to standardize it. There were set syllabuses in place for grassroots education to standardize it. So in that sense, the script was being standardized. The language at that point was not standardized because there was no education and everything. So there was different ways of speaking. So what happened was that in the script, that Southern Santali spoken in this Odisha and Jamshedpur side kind of became the medium through which script was said, talked. And so this, but that wasn't really accepted necessarily. So script was standardized, but in that sense through books and through education, but the language then was not. And so this issue of standardization now is becoming, is now being constantly discussed, but there's not like this institutions, centralizing institutions, like say in the case of Bengali, or perhaps in the case of Assamese too, like these institutional apparatuses, state power, all of these things which standardize languages like that, right? So that in the absence of that, you have a more fluid situation, even though the script itself as a template is kind of set in at that time.
So what I'm trying to sort of figure out, Nishaant, is that when it was set to a certain grammatical structure, was it accepted all round, or was there a dispute about what should be the ideal, script and all that? Was there some kind of a dispute within the community, or was it automatically accepted as the template, as you say? Is that how did it?
Yeah. So as far as like dispute about within the Ol Chiki, like what the letters were and everything, I think that was not much disputed, although like different people tried to, because Raghunath Murmu himself like lived for a long time, until 80s, and he wrote many things, and his, the group, the organization that he started is promoting it and everything. So in that sense, but there was a lot of dispute about the script, right? Like people didn't accept that script very easily. And still, if you go, like people don't accept it, although it's becoming more and more accepted, like, and it's more accepted now. So in that sense, that was.
So the people, by people, you mean the speakers of Santali?
Yeah.
There was lack of acceptance within the entire community of Santali speakers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there a lot of people accepted it, but a lot of people, like many of the older, writers I talked to, many of the, editors and everything, they didn't actually accept the script that much. I mean, they thought it was a diversion from promoting the language, and it's like, why learn an extra script? But I think the newer generation of people are very much much more accepted, right? And it's much more spread. And now it's in schools, now it's in colleges, now because the proponents were very vocal politically. And so then it's changing now. So people are accepting it more.
Okay. So there's just one more question that I have is, when you talk about this book, as you say, brings an entirely new perspective when studying both language and scripts, because you have books that subordinate scripts to language, and in this case the primacy of position is taken by the study of scripts. Now both language and script, they draw their identity from the larger autonomy movement, the linguistic autonomy movement. So in this case, Santali, moving from orality to a written, a written culture, it is essential to see how the script pans out and in various domains. But methodologically speaking, in general, are you proposing that script should get a primacy of position? Does it bring new insights into the study of a movement, autonomy movement as such, or both of them should be studied simultaneously? What would be your take on this?
I think, yeah, simultaneously, but not analytically. We can separate it, because also that's, so like say we start with, like in this case, what script is offering as, I mean, they can be studied even separately in a sense. And, and of course, in a study like say mine, like it's focused on script, right? And language, of course, language plays a role, but I'm trying to also reconceive language from kind of a focus on script. What if we start with script and see how that kind of informs the politics, rather than just looking at script as a subset of language. So I'm trying to sort of think about, I think it's different starting points one has, and I think different studies can come out of where you start from, and that can give you different insights. And in multiscriptal environments, multiscriptal areas in which this is definitely one. I think if we look at just language, then it will we won't see as much of the kind of fine grade distinctions. We won't see that the different scripts have the different kind of histories. The materiality portion might get subordinated. So that's why I think looking at script from that point of view, and then seeing what ideas of language can come out of that is a different sort of methodological starting point. So yeah.
Thank you. There must be other questions from the audience.
Hi, Nishaant. So it's just a very simple and maybe a very naive question, but I was kind of interested in that. So I'm just wondering, if you could talk a little bit more about how this could become a heuristic framework for multiscriptality and politics, and especially politics in this sense around linguistic autonomy, maybe in other parts of India or maybe around the world. I mean, I'm just wondering, because at some point, I think in the discussion, Pranjali and Dr. Soren, I mean, they all mentioned this, you said this too, that there's also a larger goal in this book, which is to set up a framework that could potentially study certain similar contexts. Maybe, of course, not everything would be the same, but I'm just wondering if you have something in mind that you would want to share with us. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, something like this, if we go and look at script as a starting point, I think we can get like a very different, of course, the most obvious one is Hindi Urdu, in India, right? I mean, people are very confused about the whole thing, even, this many years, 75, 80 years after independence, or 100 years after this Hindi and Urdu are posited as separate languages. People are kind of very confused about the whole thing because there's an idea of language as primary, even though these are linguistically the same language, right? I mean, that's just very clear. But and there have been some works looking at it, looking at this idea of script and everything, but still, this idea of language as separate, as Urdu language is separate, we lose a lot of what's going on in the Urdu writing communities. They're using now Devanagari as Urdu. They're using different, there's people writing in Gujarati script in Urdu, people doing all kinds of things, positing what is Urdu, like what is this whole, constellation called Urdu, right? I mean, that's just one of the biggest examples of where we lose out on this diversity and lose out on the local structure when we talk about, when we just posit things as different languages, and it ends up being a very sort of confusing picture. So I think taking starting point of script, multiscriptality, in looking at in frameworks in anthropology, linguistics, history, and discussions of politics can give us a different kind of nuance, right? And I think the work is now being done in South Asia, Southeast Asia, many places. The work is starting to be done looking at that. So, you know, and then also theoretically speaking, like if we start from the bigger question of writing and speech, you know, this question of this, you know, the Derridian one that pushes us, right? That's another question also in a larger frame, like what is writing and speech? I addressed that a little bit in the book as well. Yeah.
Right. No, I had a sort of slightly different question again, I suppose very elementary, but I'm just curious to know this. When the language was standardized, especially in the system of writing, was there a sense of loss in the community that certain nuances became perhaps, you know, perhaps certain nuances were lost during the systematization of language? I mean, be it the lexicographic systematization or the scriptal systematization. I'm just wondering, and because I'm not just thinking of the Santali community alone, I'm thinking of languages that are not standardized and have a certain, you know, connection with an oral past, let's say, as and when they get standardized, as and when they get a script of their own, is there also a sense of loss? So I'm in a way, I'm looking at the other side of the autonomy question here, whether there are certain cultural nuances or other kinds of things lost in the process of this systematization, or whether the community feels like that a little bit sometimes. Just a curiosity. Could be a very naive question.
Yeah, I think in some sense, there are many things that are actually lost, you know, if you like focus on writing, and, you know, when people change their sort of minds from, like, you know, being in these very immersive kind of culture to like this print text culture and things, many things are lost. But what I think what the thing was about this, like these scripts, you know, when these new scripts are developed, what they try to do is they try to bridge, in some sense, the orality literacy question, right? So Ol Chiki is very much embedded in the idea of songs and performance and certain kind of histories as like very integral to the script formation and circulation, right? So like the oral culture, it doesn't, like, it says, oh yeah, we need to learn and read and write, but also like the proponents of the script say, Santali, the oral culture is still very important, this, that, you know, so that, like, so what they do is the Ol Chiki movement also reimagine the oral traditions, right? So the oral traditions, in a sense, became, you know, changed, right? And so much so, in fact, that when people are singing songs now, not just Ol Chiki, but literacy in general, like when people are singing songs now in Santali, like out in the villages, you know, those songs are now like in meter, you know, they're following actually written norms, even though there's no writing there, right? Because those are the songs that are circulating. So the oral tradition, oral things are also reimagined through writing. And so people then kind of bridge them together. So in a sense, the question is not about the orality and literacy, but it's about the language. I mean, it's about, you know, how like orality and literacy are kind of bridged within any kind of particular formation or understood. So yeah, does that answer your question?
No, thank you. Thank you. I think there's another question in the chat.
May I respond to that question or go a bit?
Sure.
Yeah, just adding on to what Nishaant said, basically, I wanted to say that when basically an oral language is being tried to be written down, it's like in saying in layman's language, trying to portray something 3D into a 2D thing. So if I may say so, like the different kind of pronunciations that are being tried to be written down and communicated to the other person, there are definitely senses of loss. And that is where basically people started to try and initiate the Ol Chiki as a script, as from the idea that writing Santali in Bangla script, all in Roman script with diacritics, of course, they had also undergone a number of standardizations and agreed upon meetings and as such, but the glottal sound that is present very much in Santali language is believed to be not a correct representation through those scripts. But whereas Ol Chiki tries to capture it, yes, but still in the present times, even Ol Chiki has its shortcomings, and there are debate as we speak here about certain mu to do, gahla to do, the different kinds of letters that are, or additions or diacritics that are present, which are also debated as how exactly or how close are we towards the different kind of oral, how we pronounce the words, so to say. So Nishaant, won't you agree to this?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of debates, about this sort of relations between, just like Rahi said, between what scripts can offer what, and the Ol Chiki, like how, what are the shortcomings of Ol Chiki in particular sounds and particular, and plus the dialects also, like the different varieties of Santali, right? Like,
yeah,
are saying that there's different ways in which we pronounce different kinds of words, and that's not captured properly in Ol Chiki or other. So there's a lot of debate around that. So yeah, I think when writing comes in, when language is placed materially on the page, then it creates this different kind of debate, right? About what is different things are lost, but also different things are revealed to be understood as problems, right? When we have language written there. So
thank you, Rahi. Thank you, Nishaant. Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat box. I'll read it out. Could you please elaborate a bit on the socio-spatial production of the local bazaar in Jilimili and the way caste spaces are navigated in the built spaces with different scripts? For example, which non-Santhal caste groups are using what scripts in shops, advertisements, etc.?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So the bazaar is seen, even though like this area I was working was predominantly Santali, Adivasi. The bazaar where I was, the bazaar is sort of envisioned as a Diku space, right? A non-Santal space, right? I mean, certain things you couldn't do there, like, certain things you couldn't eat there, right? Certain things you couldn't eat in public, certain things you couldn't drink there. Whereas in the villages, of course, those things you could do. So even if there were mostly Santals in the area, because there were these, upper caste, non-Santals, or even, non-Santals of different castes, not just like Savarna, but different caste groups were there who had their norms. They kind of imposed it upon the bazaar space. And so one way that the Santals could assert in that space their claim to territory, even though they're, they saw it as a kind of foreign space, was through the scripts and through placing Santali language in different places or showing the script in different places. But then the non-Santals also used Ol Chiki script. I mean, they were telling me, they have an audience, they're in their Santali area, they would use Ol Chiki script, but they would use it in some different ways. Like, for instance, the Ol Chiki script would be smaller than the Eastern Brahmi script. So in that sense, or there would be Ol Chiki Eastern Brahmi combination instead of Ol Chiki Roman combination, which was often done, right? So that would be, because usually it would either be Santali and Eastern Brahmi or Ol Chiki and Roman combination, maybe with some Eastern Brahmi there. So non-Santal caste would like open up to Ol Chiki, but it would also be very limited and it would also not be, it wouldn't be in the same frame as the way the Santal castes open it. Santal community used it, or in their own thing, and you would see these competing sort of combinations and in the bazaar space. So yeah, in that sense, the navigation of the bazaar space was always, even though it was everyday occurrences, every day, and there was Santal plurality there, it was something that was complex. And the Santal people would engage with the non-Santal spaces they would have to, and then scripts and the signs and everything, but the non-Santal people would only very selectively engage with the Santal people. Sometimes, there's Santali language posters everywhere, but people didn't even notice them, the Bengali people. They didn't even notice them or care really that much about it. So many of them. So it's a different, they didn't have to engage, whereas the Santal people had to engage. So it's a different kind of setup there that created the caste hierarchy in space, even though it was contested. Yeah.
Are there any more questions from the audience? You could unmute or you could type it out and we will take it up. I think the audience doesn't have any more questions. I think in that case, I think I would like to thank Dr. Choksi. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into your book. I would also like to thank Pranjali and Dr. Soren for being here with us today. Thank you so much for taking out your time and joining us at Dialogues. And I think we can end today's session. Thank you all for being, for all of those who waited till the end of the session, and we hope to see you at the next session of Dialogues.